A man worth $10 billion walks into a quiet steakhouse, disguised as a man worth nothing at all. He isn't looking for a 5-star meal. He's hunting for a ghost, a memory from a life he thought was buried 20 years ago. He orders a simple steak, expecting another empty evening in a long line of them. But the young waitress serving him doesn't just see a lonely old man. She sees a secret. And as she clears his plate, she leaves behind a small folded note. This isn't a phone number. It's a key to a locked room in his past, and the words written inside will stop his world from turning. What if a single sentence scribbled on a napkin could unravel a 20-year-old lie and expose a truth more devastating than he could ever imagine? To the world, Julian Croft was a titan, a name whispered in the same breath as Rockefeller and Carnegie. His company, Croft Innovations, had reshaped the digital landscape, his face etched with the stern lines of command, and a fortune valued in the tens of billions graced the covers of Forbes and Time. But the man who shuffled into the Gilded Spoon Steakhouse on a Tuesday night was not Julian Croft. He was Arthur Finch, a retired librarian, with worn corduroy trousers, a fraying tweed jacket, and the profound, invisible weight of a man who had lost everything that mattered long before he had gained anything of value. The Gilded Spoon was intentionally mediocre. It was a place of comfortable anonymity, with dark wood paneling, vinyl booths cracked like old leather, and the lingering scent of fried onions and cleaning fluid. It was the kind of place where nobody looked twice, which was precisely its appeal. For the past 6 months, Julian, or rather Arthur, had been drifting through the quiet suburbs of Middle America, frequenting diners, libraries, and parks. He wasn't on vacation. He was on a pilgrimage of penance. 20 years ago, Julian Croft was a brilliant but struggling software engineer with a wife, Elena, whose laugh could fill a room, and a 5-year-old daughter, Lily, whose world was a kaleidoscope of sidewalk chalk and bedtime stories. They were his sun, his moon, his entire universe. Then came the fire. A faulty wire in their small mortgaged home, the official report said. An accident. Julian had been away at a tech conference, a trip he'd fought with Elena about, insisting it was their ticket to a better life. He returned to a pile of ash and 2 death certificates. The grief hollowed him out. He poured the empty space where his heart had been into his work, building an empire on a foundation of code and sorrow. Every success felt like ash in his mouth. The money, the power, the accolades, it was all a monument to his failure to be there when it counted. But 6 months ago, a deathbed confession from a retired private investigator he had once hired to look into a business rival changed everything. The investigator, gasping for breath, admitted he'd taken money, a lot of it, from a man named Marcus Thorne to falsify evidence years ago. Thorne, Julian's former partner and friend, the one he had ruthlessly pushed out of their budding company just months before the fire. The investigator's confession was fragmented, but one detail was chillingly clear: the fire was no accident, and there was a chance, however slim, that Elena and Lily had not been in the house. Thorne, consumed by jealousy, had orchestrated it all. The confession shattered Julian's world for a second time. His grief, a cold, solid thing, morphed into a raging, desperate hope. Were they alive? Could they be? He couldn't use his vast resources that would alert Thorne, who was now a powerful, untouchable figure in his own right. A public search would put a target on their backs. So the Titan became a ghost. Julian Croft vanished, and Arthur Finch was born, armed with a faded photograph and a list of towns Eleanor had once mentioned, places where she dreamed of opening a small bookstore. He was searching for a whisper, a trace, a life that might have been. He took a seat in a booth at the back of the Gilded Spoon. A young woman with tired eyes, a smudge of flour on her cheek and a dark ponytail, approached him. Her name tag read Clara. "Evening, what can I get for you?" she asked, her voice, professional but weary. "Just a New York strip medium rare." "Black coffee." He grunted, not looking up from the worn menu. He watched her as she moved through the restaurant. She had a quiet efficiency, a grace born of exhaustion. She refilled ketchup bottles, wiped down tables, and offered a strained smile to a family with unruly children. There was a sadness in her eyes that Julian recognized a reflection of his own. He felt a pang of something unfamiliar, a connection, however fleeting, to another person's struggle. It was a feeling he had long since buried under layers of wealth and isolation. The steak arrived, cooked perfectly. He ate slowly, mechanically. The restaurant was a blur of muffled conversations and the clinking of cutlery. Another town, another dead end. The hope that had burned so brightly was dimming into a familiar, cold despair. He was about to signal for the check when Clara returned to his table. "Everything all right with the steak, sir?" "It was fine, thank you," he said, his voice flat. She nodded her eyes, lingering on him for a moment longer than necessary. He saw a flicker of something in her gaze, hesitation, maybe even fear. She began to clear his plates, her movements quick and slightly clumsy. As she picked up his empty plate, her hand brushed against the napkin dispenser. He thought nothing of it. "I'll get your check," she said, her voice barely a whisper, and hurried away. When she returned, she placed the small leather billfold on the table and left without another word. Julian pulled out a wad of cash, leaving a $50 tip on a $20 meal, a habit he couldn't break, a small anonymous apology for the world's unfairness. As he stood up to leave, he noticed it. Tucked beneath the billfold was a small, neatly folded napkin. It wasn't part of the check. It had been placed there deliberately. His first thought was that she had written her number, a clumsy pass at a lonely old man. He almost tossed it away. But curiosity, a long-dormant instinct, made him pick it up. His hands, which had signed deals worth billions, trembled slightly as he unfolded the cheap paper. There were no numbers. There was only a single sentence written in shaky, urgent cursive. 5 words that stole the air from his lungs and sent a jolt through his body so powerful he had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling. The note read, "The blackbird still sings at dawn." His blood ran cold. The steakhouse, the people, the entire world dissolved into a roaring in his ears. It couldn't be. It was impossible. It was a secret code, a silly romantic phrase he and Eleanor had invented 2 decades ago. It was their private signal, their promise to each other, a message of hope for dark times. It meant, "I'm safe, I'm thinking of you, don't give up." No one else in the world could have known that phrase. No one. He looked up wildly, his eyes scanning the restaurant. Clara was gone. Panic, hot and sharp, pierced through the icy shock. Julian's carefully constructed disguise of Arthur Finch shattered in an instant. He was no longer a passive observer, a ghost drifting through his own life. He was a predator whose prey had just flickered across his vision. He shoved the napkin into his pocket, his knuckles white. His mind, the same analytical machine that could dissect a corporate merger in seconds, raced through 1,000 possibilities, each more unbelievable than the last. Was it a trap? Was Thorne playing some cruel psychological game? Had he been found out? Or was it what his heart desperately screamed? It was a message from the grave. He threw the cash onto the table and strode towards the kitchen, his slow, elderly shuffle forgotten. He pushed through the swinging doors, ignoring the surprised shout from a line cook. The kitchen was a chaotic ballet of steam, clattering pans and shouted orders. "Where is she?" Julian's voice, was a low growl unrecognizable from the gentle murmur of Arthur Finch. It was the voice that had made CEOs tremble. A burly chef with a sweat-stained bandana turned a spatula in his hand like a weapon. "Hey, customers aren't allowed back here. Who are you looking for?" "Clara, the waitress. Where is she?" "Her shift just ended. She punched out 5 minutes ago. Now get out of my kitchen, old man, before I call the cops." Julian was already gone, pushing back through the doors and into the main dining room. He scanned the exits, his gaze landing on the employee entrance at the side of the building. He burst out into the cool night air of the alley. It was empty, except for a row of overflowing dumpsters and the low hum of a ventilation fan. He saw her then. A small figure, huddled at the far end of the alley, half hidden in the shadows, pulling a thin hoodie over her work uniform. It was Clara. She was fumbling with a set of keys, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't fit the key into the lock of a beat-up sedan. He started towards her, his footsteps echoing ominously in the narrow space. She heard him, and froze, her head snapping up. The fear in her eyes was stark and real under the yellow glow of the security light. She looked like a cornered animal. "Stay back," she stammered, holding her keys out in front of her like a pathetic weapon. I don't have any money." Julian stopped a few feet away, raising his hands to show he meant no harm, though every fiber of his being was screaming with urgency. He forced his voice to soften, trying to resurrect the harmless Arthur. "The note," he said, his voice raspy. "Where did you hear those words?" Her face paled. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," he said, the steel seeping back into his tone. He took a step closer. "The blackbird still sings at dawn. That is not a random phrase. It's a message. Who gave it to you?" Tears welled in her eyes. She wasn't a co-conspirator in some elaborate trap. She was a terrified young woman caught in the middle of something far beyond her. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You have to go. If he sees you with me." "He, who is he?" Julian pressed his mind, latching onto the word. "Thorne. It had to be Thorne. To be. Is it Marcus Thorne?" The name hit her like a physical blow. She flinched, a small gasp escaping her lips. Her eyes darted around the alley, as if expecting monsters to leap from the shadows. That was all the confirmation he needed. "How do you know him? How do you know about the blackbird?" he demanded, his patience evaporating. "Is it Eleanor? Is she alive?" Clara finally broke. A sob tore from her throat. "I can't talk about it here. Not here. He watches. He has people everywhere." "Then talk to me somewhere else. Get in my car. I'll take you anywhere you say. I need to know." Julian pleaded, the desperation raw in his voice. "Please. I have lived in the dark for 20 years. 20 years. If you know something. Anything." She looked at his face, at the deep, sorrowful lines etched around his eyes, and saw past the shabby disguise. She saw the raw agony of a man on the brink. Her fear warred with a deep, bone-weary sense of duty. "Not your car," she said, her resolve hardening slightly. "Mine. There's an all-night diner off Route 8, the Starlight Diner. It's always crowded. We can talk there. Follow me. But stay back a few car lengths, and for God's sake, act normal." Without another word, she finally managed to unlock her car door, slid inside, and started the engine with a sputtering roar. She pulled out of the alley and onto the street. Julian rushed back to his own vehicle, a nondescript Ford that was the automotive equivalent of his Arthur Finch persona. As he started the engine, his hands were steady again. The shock had been replaced by a cold, singular focus. He pulled out onto the road, keeping Clara's rattling sedan in sight. His mind was a maelstrom. Eleanor. The name was a prayer on his lips. Could she be alive? After all this time, could he get back the life that was stolen from him? And who was this girl, Clara? How was she connected to a secret? Only 2 people on Earth were supposed to know. He gripped the steering wheel, the folded napkin in his pocket, feeling as heavy as a gold brick. For the first time in 20 years, the ghost of Julian Croft had a purpose other than mourning. He was no longer hunting for a whisper. He was following a trail, and he would tear the world apart to see where it led. The Starlight Diner was an oasis of fluorescent light against the dark rural highway. It smelled of stale coffee, burnt bacon, and the quiet desperation of late-night travelers. Julian once again, cloaked in the persona of Arthur Finch, slid into the booth opposite Clara. A cracked red vinyl seat separated them, but it felt like a canyon of unspoken history. Clara wrapped her trembling hands around a mug of hot water, her waitress uniform now hidden under her thin hoodie. She wouldn't meet his eyes, staring instead at the swirling steam as if it held the answers to a question she was terrified to ask. "Who are you?" she asked, finally, her voice low. "Really?" Julian paused the lie of Arthur Finch, feeling flimsy and disrespectful in the face of the moment's gravity. "My name is Julian Croft." He watched for a reaction, but the name meant nothing to her. She was just a young woman working a dead-end job far removed from the worlds of finance and technology. It was both a relief and a stark reminder of the life his family might have been living. "Okay, Julian Croft," she said, testing the name. "She told me you'd come one day. She always believed you would." Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. Eleanor." Clara finally looked up, and the depth of her sadness mirrored his own. "No, not Eleanor." The hope that had flared so brightly in his chest sputtered, threatening to die. "Then who?" Lily Clara whispered. "I'm a friend of your daughter Lily." The world tilted on its axis. Lily, his little girl, the 5-year-old with pigtails and a missing front tooth, was a grown woman. She was alive. The confirmation sent a wave of relief and agony through him, so intense it was dizzying. Relief that she existed, agony for the 20 years he had missed. "She's alive." He breathed the words, more a confirmation to himself than a question. "Where is she? Is she okay? Why send you? Why the note?" "Whoa, slow down," Clara said, holding up a hand. "This is complicated and dangerous. You have no idea." She took a deep breath and began to speak. Her story tumbled out in a torrent of hushed, hurried words. She had met Lily 2 years ago. They both worked at a different restaurant back then, a greasy spoon a few towns over. Lily went by the name Anna. She was quiet, reserved, and incredibly kind, but she carried a profound sadness with her, a constant fear in her eyes that Clara recognized from her own difficult past. They became friends, bonding over long shifts and shared struggles. It was months before Lily trusted her enough to tell her the truth. She told Clara about her real name, about a fire, and about a powerful, dangerous man who had haunted her and her mother's lives for 2 decades. "Elena passed away 3 years ago," Clara said softly, and Julian had to physically hold the table to steady himself. The hope of seeing his wife again was extinguished, and the grief was as fresh and raw as it was the day he stood before the ruins of their home. It was cancer. She fought for a long time. Lily was with her until the end. He closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the dust of his soul. How did they survive the fire? "There was no fire," Clara said, her voice laced with anger. "Not for them. Marcus Thorne, he set a fire to the empty house to cover his tracks. But he took them. He was obsessed with your wife, Julian. He told Elena you had died in a car accident, on your way home from the conference. He said he was saving them. The betrayal was a physical poison seeping into Julian's veins. Marcus, his friend, the best man at his wedding, had not only tried to murder him in effigy, but had stolen his entire world and twisted it with monstrous lies. He kept them, Clara continued, her voice trembling with the horror of the story. Not in a cage, nothing like that. It was worse. He kept them in a prison of fear and dependency. He moved them from town to town, changed their names, gave them enough money to live, but never enough to escape. He controlled every aspect of their lives. He told Elena that if she ever tried to contact anyone from her past, the people who killed you would find her and finish the job. She lived her whole life believing you were gone, and that she was a loose end for some shadowy enemy. Julian felt sick. He had been mourning a tragic accident while his wife and daughter were living a 2-decade-long nightmare held captive by a lie. After Elena died, the control got worse for Lily, Clara explained. Thorne saw her as a replacement, a legacy of his obsession. He doesn't hold her physically, but he has her trapped. He controls her bank account. Her apartment lease is in his name. He has people who check in on her. She's completely isolated. She has no one. She has you, Julian stated. Clara nodded, wiping a tear from her eye. I'm the only one. After I quit that job, we stayed in touch, secretly. A burner phone, coded emails. It was Lily's idea to find you. Her mother had told her the truth about you before she died, that you weren't dead, that Thorne had lied about everything. Elena's dying wish was for Lily to find her father. Lily started searching online, trying to find any trace of Julian Croft, the brilliant engineer. And she found you, all of you, the billionaire, the legend. She was terrified. How could she, Anna, a nobody, reach a man like that? She was convinced Thorne monitored everything you did, that reaching out directly would be a death sentence for them both. So she sent you, Julian concluded, the pieces clicking into place. It was a desperate plan. She knew from her mother that you used to visit this region sometimes for business. Lily found out I was working here. She gave me the note, the phrase her mother had told her about. She told me to look for an older man, sad-looking, who came in alone. She said her mother always said you had the saddest eyes when you were deep in thought. It was a 1 in a billion shot. I've been holding on to that note for 6 months, looking at every lonely old man who walked through the door. Julian stared at her, overwhelmed by the sheer impossible odds, the faith of a daughter he hadn't seen in 20 years, and the bravery of the young woman sitting in front of him. Why are you doing this, Clara? This is dangerous for you. Clara looked down at her hands. Because nobody should have to live like that. And because Lily's the only real friend I've ever had. She deserves a life. She deserves her father. The weight of it all settled on Julian. Lily was alive, but she was a prisoner. He was no longer just a father searching for his daughter. He was a king with an army, and his child was locked in an enemy's tower. The grief in him, finally after 20 years, gave way completely to a cold, crystalline rage. He will not have her for 1 more day, Julian Croft said, and the harmless librarian Arthur Finch was gone forever. He has no idea who he's dealing with. Julian left the diner and drove not to his cheap motel room, but to a small private airfield an hour away. The nondescript Ford was abandoned in a long-term parking lot, a shed skin he no longer needed. As he walked across the tarmac towards a sleek Gulfstream jet that sat waiting in the pre-dawn gloom, he was already making a call. The phone was answered on the first ring. "Mr. Croft, are you all right?" The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and belonged to David Sterling, the head of Julian's personal security detail, and his most trusted confidant. David was a former Special Forces operative who had been with Julian for 15 years, the only person who knew the truth behind his 6-month sabbatical. "David, it's happened," Julian said, his voice devoid of any emotion but ice. "I found her. Lily. She's alive." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. "My God, Julian, she's not safe," Julian cut him off. "Thorne has her. I need you to assemble the team. The best we have. Digital forensic surveillance extraction specialists. I want them ready before I land in New York. No expense spared. I want silent, invisible ghosts." "Consider it done. What's the target?" "Marcus Thorne." Julian spat the name like venom. "I want everything on him. Financial records, communications, political connections, his daily routine, the brand of toilet paper he uses. I want to know every secret he has, every skeleton in his closet. I want to own him before he even knows we're at war. And David, I want him dismantled, not ruined, not broken, dismantled. I want him erased. Understood, Julian. We'll be ready." As the jet ascended into the dark sky, leaving the quiet world of Arthur Finch behind, Julian Croft was reborn. The weary, grieving man was gone, replaced by the calculating titan who had built an empire. For years he had wielded his power for profit and influence. Now, for the first time, he would use it as a weapon. He spent the flight in a state of hyper-focused activity. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He worked. With a secure satellite link, he and David's burgeoning team began to build a profile of the enemy. Marcus Thorne had become immensely wealthy and powerful. After being pushed out of his and Julian's initial venture, he had used his cunning and ruthlessness to build his own empire in real estate and private equity. He was a pillar of the community, a philanthropist whose name adorned hospital wings and university buildings. He was charming, untouchable, and, as Julian now knew, a monster hiding in plain sight. The initial digital probe conducted by the best white-hat hackers money could buy started to paint a picture of Thorne's control over Lily. Just as Clara had said, he controlled her finances through a complex trust that he could turn off at a moment's notice. He paid for her apartment in a mid-range complex in a city 3 states away. The surveillance team, using satellite imagery and cross-referencing public records, identified the building within hours. But they also found something more sinister. Thorne employed a private security firm, a shady outfit run by ex-cops of questionable ethics. They weren't guarding Lily, they were monitoring her. The team identified 2 men who lived in her building, men with no apparent jobs, whose daily routines revolved around Lily's movements. They were his digital and physical jailers. The deeper they dug, the uglier it got. Thorne's life was a carefully curated facade. He had a string of failed relationships, all ending with women signing ironclad NDAs. He had a reputation for vindictive business practices, crushing smaller competitors for sport. He was a man obsessed with control, and Lily was his ultimate prize, a living trophy from the man he felt had wronged him. Julian felt a suffocating rage. While he had been building Croft Innovations, a company that connected the world, Thorne had been building a cage around his daughter. Every dollar Thorne had made, every bit of influence he had gained, had been used to perfect this prison. By the time the jet landed in New York, a full-scale covert operation was underway. Julian stepped out of the plane into a waiting armored SUV and was handed a tablet. On the screen was a live encrypted feed. "We have eyes on her," David said from the passenger seat. "A surveillance van is across the street from her apartment building. We've tapped into the building's security cameras." On the screen, Julian saw her for the first time in 20 years. A grainy black and white image of a woman leaving the building's lobby, She was tall and slender, with long dark hair like her mother's. Even in the poor resolution, he could see the graceful way she moved, a resilience that Thorne had not managed to crush. He saw her face as she stepped out onto the sidewalk, a face that was a heart-breakingly beautiful mix of his own determination and Eleanor's gentle features. She was no longer the 5-year-old girl from his memories. She was a woman, his daughter, a stranger. A wave of protectiveness so fierce it almost buckled him over washed through Julian. The plan wasn't just about rescuing her anymore. It was about reclaiming every second that had been stolen. "He has her on a short leash," David reported, his voice grim. "She goes to a part-time job at a local library, a job he undoubtedly arranged, and then straight back home. She meets no one. She talks to no one. According to Clara, Lily knows she's being watched constantly. She's been living this way for years." Julian zoomed in on the image of Lily's face. He saw the subtle downturn of her mouth, the guarded look in her eyes, as she scanned the street. It was the look of a prisoner who knew the walls were invisible but still solid. "What's Thorne's location?" Julian asked, his voice cold. "He's in his office in downtown Manhattan, scheduled to attend a charity gala tonight. He'll be in the public eye until at least midnight." "Good," Julian said, looking from Lily's face on the tablet to the glittering skyline of the city he commanded. "Tonight the blackbird leaves the cage, and the wolf who built it is going to find out what it feels like to be hunted." The war room was not a room at all, but the top floor of a discreet, unmarked skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, owned by a shell corporation of a shell corporation. It was Julian Croft's private sanctuary and operational hub, a place that technically didn't exist. Floor-to-ceiling smart glass windows could turn opaque at the touch of a button, and the air was thick with the low hum of powerful servers. A team of 6 specialists, the best in their fields, sat at a bank of computers, their faces illuminated by streams of data. David Sterling directed them with quiet, precise commands. Julian stood before a massive screen, displaying a dozen different feeds, thermal imaging of Lily's apartment building, live audio from a bug placed on one of Thorne's guards' cars, financial data streams, and a live satellite map tracking Thorne's limousine as it moved through the city. The plan for Lily's extraction was codenamed Blackbird. It was designed to be a whisper, not a thunderclap. A frontal assault was too risky. It could panic Lily and give Thorne a reason to harm her or disappear her completely. They had to move like ghosts. The key was Clara. She had been flown in on Julian's jet and was now in a secure suite in a nearby hotel, scared but resolute. She was their only trusted line of communication. "All right, let's run it again," Julian said, his voice commanding the room. A communications expert, a young woman named Anya, spoke up. "Clara will call Lily on the burner phone at 19:30 hours. She will use a prearranged code phrase. 'I found that rare book you were looking for.' That's the signal that the extraction is a go for tonight." Lily's response, "Is it a first edition?" will confirm she is alone and able to proceed. David continued, pointing to a blueprint of the apartment building on the screen. "Lily's apartment is on the 3rd floor, number 3B. Thorne's 2 watchers are in 3D across the hall, and 2B directly below her. They are low-level thugs, not professionals. Complacent. Our team has confirmed they rotate their check-in, a knock on her door, to make sure she's home at 8 p.m. and midnight. We move between those checks," Julian affirmed. The plan was a masterclass in subtlety. There would be no broken doors or dramatic escapes. At 2015, Anya would execute a targeted network failure, taking down the internet and cell service in a 2-block radius around the building, blamed on a faulty transformer. This would disable the building's Wi-Fi-based security cameras and prevent Thorne's men from communicating easily. Simultaneously, two members of Julian's team, a man and a woman, posing as a bickering couple, would create a minor noisy disturbance in the hallway. On the second floor, a domestic spat, just loud enough to draw the attention of the man in 2B. At that moment, David said, our primary extraction specialist, a former Mossad agent named Ava, will be waiting in the stairwell. Lily's instructions are to walk out of her apartment, leaving the door unlocked, and head for the stairs as if she's going to check on the commotion. She is to carry nothing but her purse. Ava will intercept her in the stairwell. They will exit through a basement service door. A car will be waiting in the alley. It was elegant. It was precise. But it all hinged on the courage of a young woman who had lived in fear for 20 years. What about the watchers? Julian asked, his eyes fixed on the screen. They won't know she's gone until the midnight check-in. By then she will be on a different continent, if necessary. We'll leave a digital echo loop on the building's server. When their system comes back online, it will play a 4-hour loop of old footage showing her lobby movements from yesterday. It won't hold up to scrutiny, but it will buy us a 12-hour head start. Anya explained. The final piece was Thorne himself. Julian watched the feed of the charity gala. He saw Marcus Thorne, handsome and smiling in a tuxedo, shaking hands, exuding charisma. A wolf in sheep's clothing. Julian had arranged for a reporter from a major financial journal, a reporter whose career Julian had discreetly saved years ago, to be at the gala. The moment we have Lily secure that reporter is going to corner Thorne for a live-streamed interview about his new philanthropic initiative, Julian said. I want him on camera smiling and preening for at least 30 minutes. I want an alibi for him time-stamped and broadcast to the world for the exact moment his prized possession vanishes. It was a cold, calculated move designed to box Thorne in. When he discovered Lily was gone, his first thought would be that she had simply run. His public appearance would make it difficult for him to immediately deploy any illicit resources to hunt for her without raising questions. The clock ticked towards 19:30. The tension in the room was palpable. Julian stood motionless, his entire multi-billion-dollar empire, his entire world focused on a single crackly phone call. It's time, Anya said. They listened in silence as the call was placed. The audio was patched into the room's speakers. They heard the ring, then a soft, hesitant voice. Hello. It was Lily. Julian squeezed his eyes shut, his heart aching. It was the first time he'd heard his daughter's voice since she was 5 years old. Hey, Anna, it's me. Clara's voice was strained but clear. Listen, I have great news. I found that rare book you were looking for. There was a pause, a silence that stretched for an eternity. The entire team held its breath. Julian felt his own lungs burn. Then the soft voice came back, stronger this time, laced with a tremor of hope and terror. Clara, oh my God. Is it a first edition? A collective sigh of relief went through the room. The very first, Clara replied, emotion choking her voice. Be ready. The call ended. Operation Blackbird was a go. Julian opened his eyes. The hunt was over. The rescue had begun. He looked at the live feed of his daughter's building, no longer seeing a prison, but the starting line of a new life. His life. Their life. The next 2 hours were the longest of Julian Croft's life. He paced the floor of the command center like a caged lion, watching the synchronized movements of his team play out on the screens. Every moment was fraught with tension. The staged argument, the network failure, the silent figure of Ava slipping into the stairwell, it all unfolded with chilling precision. Then, at 2017, he saw it. The door to apartment 3B opened. A figure emerged. It was Lily. She was wearing a simple coat, a purse slung over her shoulder. She glanced down the hall toward the source of the fake argument, her movements exactly as planned. She didn't run. She walked with a composure that spoke of incredible strength. She pulled the door shut behind her, but didn't lock it, and walked calmly to the stairwell door. She disappeared from the camera's view. Julian stopped pacing, his eyes glued to the screen, waiting. The seconds stretched into minutes. David put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Ava has her. They're in the basement now. A new camera feed flickered to life, a discreet camera they had placed in the back alley. A black sedan was idling. A service door opened. Two figures emerged, Ava, and behind her, Lily. Lily looked around, her eyes wide in the darkness, before Ava gently guided her into the back of the car. The door closed, and the car pulled smoothly away, disappearing into the city's labyrinthine streets. She was out. She was free. The relief was so overwhelming that Julian had to sit down. The strength that had held him together for the past day threatened to give way. He had his daughter back. But the night was not over. While Lily was being whisked away to a secure location, upstate Phase 2 began the reckoning. On the screen showing the gala, the reporter intercepted Marcus Thorne. The interview began, and Thorne, puffed up with self-importance, launched into a long-winded speech about corporate responsibility. He was trapped in the spotlight, a perfect fly in Julian's web. Meanwhile, a different part of Julian's team was executing a far more aggressive move. They weren't extracting a person, they were extracting data. Using a zero-day exploit they had discovered in Thorne's corporate network security, Anya and her team launched a surgical data breach. It was the digital equivalent of an army of ghosts sweeping through a fortress. They bypassed firewalls and encryption, targeting Thorne's personal files, emails, and financial records. What they found was damning. It was a complete chronicle of his obsession. Emails detailing the monitoring of Lily, encrypted financial statements showing the trust fund and the payments to his security thugs. But the crown jewel was a hidden folder containing a personal password-protected journal. Anya decrypted it within minutes. It was Thorne's private manifesto, a chilling account of his twisted love for Elena and his hatred for Julian. He detailed the fire, his lies, and his decades-long project of keeping Elena and Lily under his thumb. He saw himself not as a kidnapper, but as their savior. It was the confession of a psychopath, and it was now in Julian Croft's hands. By the time Thorne finished his interview, smiling for the cameras, his entire secret world had been stolen from under him. An hour later, Lily arrived at a sprawling, secluded estate in the Hudson Valley, one of Julian's many private properties. He was waiting for her standing on the grand stone steps under the warm glow of the porch lights. He had changed out of his suit and into a simple sweater, wanting to appear not as a titan or a billionaire, but simply as a father. The car door opened, and she stepped out. She looked up and saw him. For a moment they just stood there, separated by 20 feet of gravel and 20 years of pain. She was a woman, a stranger, but he could see the ghost of his 5-year-old in her eyes, in the nervous way she clutched her purse. He took a tentative step forward. "Lily." His voice was thick with emotion. Her composure finally broke. A strangled sob escaped her lips, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "Dad!" That one word, a word he thought he would never hear again, shattered the last of his defenses. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides and wrapped his arms around her. She felt so fragile, so real. He held his daughter for the first time in 2 decades, and the cold, hollow space in his chest was filled with a warmth so profound it was almost painful. They stood there for a long time, 2 broken pieces of a family, finally fitting back together, weeping for the years they had lost and the future they had just found. Later, sitting by a roaring fire, they began to talk. Lily told him everything about her mother's strength, their life on the run that was really a life in a cage. Elena's final days, and her unwavering belief that her husband was a good man who had been the victim of a terrible lie. She gave him the gift of knowing his wife had never stopped loving him. Julian, in turn, told her about his life, the empty empire he had built on a foundation of grief and the desperate 6-month search that had led him to a steakhouse waitress named Clara. As dawn broke, casting a soft golden light across the valley, a new chapter was beginning, but the old one had to be closed for good. Julian received a message from David. "Thorne knows. The Watcher's missed the midnight check-in. He's panicking. His whole network is in chaos." "Good," Julian said, looking at his daughter who had finally fallen into a peaceful, secure sleep on the sofa. He walked to the window, his phone in his hand, and made one last call. Marcus Thorne was in his penthouse office, frantically trying to figure out how Lily had vanished when his personal cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered it with a snarl. "Who is this?" "Hello, Marcus," said a voice from the grave. Thorne froze. The blood drained from his face. He knew that voice. It was impossible. It couldn't be. "Julian," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Surprised to hear from me." Julian's voice was calm, serene, and utterly terrifying. "I'm just calling to let you know that my daughter and I have been reunited. We have a lot of catching up to do thanks to you." You're dead," Thorne stammered. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. But your life as you know it? That's over. You see, I have a copy of your little journal, Marcus, the one where you detail kidnapping, extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder. A U.S. attorney who happens to be a very dear friend of mine is finding it fascinating reading. The IRS is also quite interested in some of your more creative accounting practices. Your assets are being frozen as we speak." Thorne stumbled backward, collapsing into his chair, gasping for air. "You built your life on my family's ashes." Julian's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "Now you'll watch it all burn. You won't go to a normal prison, Marcus. I've made sure of that. You are going to a place so dark and so deep you'll forget the sun exists. You took 20 years from me. I'm going to take the rest of your life. The blackbird is home, and you will never ever hear her sing again." Julian ended the call. He looked out at the rising sun, feeling not vengeful, but free. The ghost of Arthur Finch was gone. The Titan Julian Croft had served his purpose. Now all that was left was a father. The downfall of Marcus Thorne was not a dramatic public spectacle. It was a quiet, systemic erasure, far more terrifying in its efficiency. Federal agents arrived at his office, not with sirens, but with silent warrants. His accounts were frozen, his companies seized his name, and reputation methodically scrubbed from the high society he so desperately coveted. By the time the world read about his arrest in a small back-page article, he was already gone, swallowed by the very system he thought he had mastered. Julian ensured he would never be a threat again. In the months that followed, the Hudson Valley estate became a sanctuary for healing. For Julian and Lily, it was a process of awkward, beautiful discovery. They were strangers with a shared history, learning each other's rhythms, favorite foods, and senses of humor. Julian learned that Lily had her mother's artistic soul. She was a talented sketch artist who had filled dozens of notebooks with drawings of a world she dreamed of seeing. Lily discovered that beneath her father's intimidating intellect was a man who loved bad puns and could spend hours patiently explaining the stars in the night sky. It wasn't easy. There were shadows of trauma, moments of grief for Elena that they had to navigate together. But for every tear shed, there was a shared laugh, a new memory forged to place alongside the old ones. Clara Jenkins became a permanent part of their new unconventional family. Julian, recognizing her courage and loyalty, offered her anything she wanted. He expected her to ask for money, a house, a new life. Instead, she asked for something far more personal. She told him her dream was to become a chef, but she had never had the means to go to culinary school. Julian didn't just pay for her tuition at the most prestigious culinary institute in the world. He bought a small, failing restaurant in a nearby town and gave her the deed. "For when you graduate," he told her, "a place of your own. No strings attached." One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after the rescue, Julian found Lily sitting by the lake on the estate, sketching in her notebook. He sat beside her. For a long time they were silent, simply enjoying the peace. "I've been thinking," Julian said finally, "about Croft Innovations, about all of it." "What about it?" Lily asked, not looking up from her drawing. "I'm selling it," he said simply. "I'm handing the reins over to my board. I've built enough. I've spent 20 years building an empire to distract myself from what I'd lost. But I have you now. I have Clara. I don't need the distraction anymore." Lily finally looked at him, her eyes shining. "What will you do?" "I was thinking," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "that your mother always wanted to open a small bookstore. A quiet place with comfortable chairs and the smell of old paper. I hear there's a property available in town right next to a promising new restaurant." Lily's answering smile was as bright as the morning sun. It was the smile of a woman finally free a daughter who had found her way home. The Titan was gone. The ghost was at peace. In their place was just a man, a father ready to start his first chapter. The blackbird was finally singing in the daylight, and her song was one of hope, a promise that even after the longest, darkest night, there is always a new dawn. In the end, Julian Croft's billions didn't buy him happiness. They bought him a second chance. They became the tools he used to right a terrible wrong and reclaim the only treasure that ever truly mattered his family. His story reminds us that behind every face, whether it's a powerful CEO or a quiet waitress, there is a story of love loss and the incredible resilience of the human heart. It teaches us that true wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios, but in the connections we fight to protect and the courage to hope even after 2 decades of silence. If this story of a father's undying hope and a daughter's quiet strength moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear a story of light triumphing over darkness. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. And we'd love to hear from you in the comments below what part of Julian and Lily's journey resonated with you the most. Thank you for watching.